The one raise his hand. All right, thank you. Well, welcome. Do we have any teachers in the room? Yay, thank you. You'll be the 17th teacher that I imagine I'm going to hear from this week. So I'm glad that y'all are taking an interest in this. I'm Mike Dugan. I'm the senator for the 30th district. I represent Carroll, Douglas, Haralson, and Paulding counties. And I'm the chair of the QBE Study Committee, and I'll have all the other senators introduce themselves in just a second. This is important we do this. The last time, when this was originated, Ronald Reagan was president.
This is going to be yours. This is his.
Education has changed.
This is going to be yours.
This has all the answers.
The needs,
That's yours.
requirements of both the teachers, and more importantly to me, the kids in the classroom has changed. What we need to do is look at the formula to make sure that we're putting the appropriate amounts of money in the appropriate locations, building the appropriate amount of jobs to meet today's needs. That's the purpose of this thing. Surprisingly enough, there are people out there who don't trust government these days. It's shocking, I know. There's like 4 people that I've run into that don't trust the government. And they want to know what my real objective is in this study committee. We've been very, very proud to say we're the #1 state to do business for about a decade now. And that's great. I love that. I want to keep that. But I also want to be the #1 state for education. And funding is not the only thing, but it is a huge thing. So I asked the teachers the other day, how much of the state's budget goes to education? 37%.
It's true on QBE.
It's 52%. 52, that's K-12. I'm talking about pre-K, K-12, TCSG, university system, anything that gets them from entering to entering the workforce is 52% of the budget. But I do appreciate you reading the material. So we're going to have a couple of presenters, and then we're going to have open discussion from the audience. I understand there are a couple people here that are going to want to address the committee that will need a little help with their message. They are, just so that you know, they're going to get a little bit longer time. Okay? Because everybody's input is valued and important. So I just want to know up front, somebody doesn't go, well, that's not fair. They got more time than we did. I'm telling you from the get-go, they're going to get a little bit more time than everybody else. All right? So with that, I'm going to have the members of the committee introduce themselves, tell a little bit about themselves, and then we'll get started with our first briefing.
Yes, I'm Billy Hickman. I'm from Statesboro. I'm in the Senate. I'm Senate District 4, which is Tattnall County, Evans, Candler, Bullock, Effingham, and Emmanuel counties. And I'm very happy to be here. This is our second session, as Senator Dugan said. And it really has opened up our eyes a lot. And as he stated, we just want to be the #1 state for education. We want our kids to be able to read, have a higher level of literacy, and therefore develop our workforce. Thank you.
I'll take that. My name is Chuck Payne, and it's good to be here. And I think I get the award for driving the farthest because I came from Dalton, Georgia, which is just south of Chattanooga, Tennessee, to get here today. So, and I'm also a 30-year veteran juvenile probation officer for the state, and now I chair Education Youth in the Senate. And it's my honor to be here, and I just appreciate everybody being here and your input.
Good afternoon. I'm Nan Orrock, State Senator for Senate District 36 in the heart of Atlanta. Includes most of the 3/4 of the Atlanta city, and then the Tri-Cities, East Point, College Park, and Hateville. And I have been on the Higher Education Committee, and my sons went through public school in Atlanta, and then went on to one to UGA and one to Georgia Tech. Our investment in education is just critical. The chairman just alluded to it. I'm happy to be on this committee, and it's, I believe, made up, in my opinion, of colleagues like myself who care very much for public education and for the future for our children. And we all understand the complete linkage between successful education, quality education in Georgia, and how Georgia remains competitive to attract some of the largest corporations around the globe, quite frankly. So this is an important conversation we're having, and thanks to all of you for coming and giving your time and being a part of this dialogue. I think we all have expectations for some real positive steps that can come out of this study committee process. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Blake Tillery. I'm a state senator from Vidalia, which is, about 90 miles east of here, 60 miles really by air east of here. I represent 11 counties in southeast Georgia. It would be Treutlen, Telfair, Wheeler, Montgomery, Toombs, Tattnall, Long, part of Liberty, Wayne. It keeps going, Appling, and Jeff Davis counties. And then in redistricting, I'll pick up Bacon County and half of Coffee County. So a big swath of southeast Georgia. That's an area that I love to call home and proud to represent. I chair the Appropriations Committee, and so we get to deal with some of the budget issues that come through every day. So if you see me staring out and spacing out, you may know why. So, but thank you for allowing me to be here today. It's good to be so close to home.
Thank you. Appreciate all y'all being here. We have one more senator that's on the committee that will not be with us today. That's the Senator Tillery from Cobb County. Tippins, not Tillery's with us. Tippins from Cobb County. I'm confident that he can catch back up. He was on the school board for how many years?
12 or 14 years.
Yeah, like 14 years. He's chair of higher ed,
That's right.
and he used to have
K through 12.
education and youth. Yeah, so he's been very involved. He just couldn't make it with us today. So with that being said, we're going to start off with the Georgia Department of Education. I understand they're going to talk to us about transportation and the local 5 mil share. Okay, please.
Thank you for allowing me to present to you today. Thank you. Yes, sir.
You're good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you for allowing me to present today. I'm going to briefly talk about the pupil transportation grant and local 5 mil share funding. So we'll start off with pupil transportation. So the pupil transportation grant calculates funds to assist local school systems in their efforts to provide a safe and efficient transportation for students to and from school, for school-related activities. The formula uses data such as the number of school buses allocated, weight ratios, and cost per mile to assist in calculations. One of the issues that we've had in the current calculations is that some of the data that we use over the years, it's like over 19 years old. This is the last time that we were instructed to do a survey to get the number of buses and buses per mile, the weight. To update this, we'd have to do another survey to get those bus numbers. If we did that, the bus count would actually increase to 8,500 from 8,500 to about 13,000. So that's what we're looking at if we actually did that. In addition to the current formula, we kind of back into the dollar amount. So the Appropriation Act, it has a dollar amount there that we have, but we actually back into that amount. We're looking at, right now, the calculation, and if we updated the numbers to that 13,000, what it would be like. We're looking at maybe twice the amount of what it is now. So that $216 million that was added into House Bill 910 amended budget was really helpful, and we appreciate that. Okay. So in calculating the pupil transportation grant, we use data to identify which categories to place the school districts in. The 4 categories that we use determines the average cost per mile, per pound for districts, and afterwards we multiply those into the number of buses that we have. Again, those bus amounts are from 19 years to 34 years old. After which we determine the number of driver salaries by multiplying that times the buses also. Insurance and drug testing are also earned and based by bus calculation. In addition, operational mileage of local systems, which is obtained by the superintendent's annual report, includes the cost of fuel, oil, tires, batteries, and parts and shop management. But salaries make up the most part of the operating funds. We also calculate funding for extended mileage. So, as I mentioned before, driver's benefits are earned on a per bus allocation. For FY23, it was 10,000, a little over 10,000 per bus, per salary. And liability insurance is paid out in amounts of 139 to 500. And again, that is based on the categories that we put in place and old funding that we had, or old data that we had. We also paid $53 per bus for drug testing. So with the drug testing, the systems of contracting for bus services, they do not receive the amounts for drug testing. The final part is the extended mileage earnings. And these additional mileage earned outside of the regular transport, training and instructional laboratories outside of the science schools, field trips, instructional components, just outside of this everyday school transportation. Special education funding is earned when the bus is used beyond the time and mileage requirements in the regular or special education program of 15,000 miles, and this is the average for all school special ed buses. Vocational transportation funds can be earned for transporting at least 10 students for vocational purposes. This includes work experience, but is only funded if transportation is at 100%. And as I said before, we're not funding really transportation at 100%. So what does this look like? We had an example for Appleton County. So Appleton County had 36 buses. We multiply that times the salary of $10,802. That's what the FY23 number was. We have numbers for bus insurance and drug testing. We calculate operating funding with a formula calculation, but to back into the formula, we only fund a percentage of it. So for Appleton County's transportation funds for FY23, it's close to $600,000. And that is pretty much a high-level look at the transportation funding.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a quick question? I'm a little bit confused because on one of the slides before that, you had driver benefits or 10,802. So I was wondering what those benefits are, but on the next slide, you actually got salary is 10,802. So the 802 is actually the salary and the benefits.
Right, that's part of the earnings in there. We multiply that 10,805 times the buses. So that is part of the operational, but this is so there's different parts of the calculation. So part of the calculation is the benefits, which is 10,802 times the buses, number of buses they have.
So it's really about $15,000. That costs of what, about $15,000 per bus, 36 buses and $600,000. About 40 and 600 would be about $15,000 per bus. Is that kind of uniform across the state?
Yes.
It is.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Other questions?
I was just going to ask Senator Hickman to repeat his summary. Oh, that's okay. Keep talking.
Oh, my question was on this first one here. It was the 10,802. Go back to your first slide. See, the driver benefits are earned per bus 10,802, and I thought that was like the health insurance and all that. But on the second slide, it really shows that the salary and the benefits are 10,802. So then, if you come to the next slide. and you just a round numbers, and take that 36 buses, that round it to 40, so 40 into 600,000 is about $15,000 per bus is what the cost is, total, including salary and everything.
Right, when you include the whole formula calculation.
That's right.
John, thank you. I've just been so impressed, first of all, with everything you've, over the past few months that you've been able to help us understand. You're really good at your job, and you understand it much better than we do, so thank you for taking the time. When you have the operating funds number there, is that a number given to you by the system, or is that a number that you guys calculate? And if so, how do you calculate that?
So that is a number that we calculate. So we have the data, and our facilities program actually calculates this number, and they back into that. So that's the number, like you see that $1.2 million there. So that's the actual operating funds earned.
Yeah, that's
But
what,
then
that's
we have
what,
to back.
yeah,
we
I'm
have
trying to,
back
but,
into it.
but before you back in, I understand the back end, and it may be, I don't know if you're prepared to talk about why we back into that number and how that's happened over time, and when we tried to not back into it, how we had systems tell us,
Right.
please do back into it. But the 1.197, is that calculated, do you look at like how many miles they have to travel
Yes.
or oil change? Can you give me a little bit of the meat that makes up that 1.197 in this example?
So, so we get information from the school districts with the number of mileage that they have per mile. We also have per pound for buses. It's part of the calculation. I'd be really comfortable in showing you offline.
That's
show-
perfectly fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because there's several pieces to that.
Okay.
Actually, I didn't include them.
Any more questions?
The takeaway from this then is that there's a big gap in what's sent down to the schools or sent out to the schools from the state level for this transportation issue for the buses. There's a huge funding gap, and that's all on the local school system to figure out how to
Yes.
meet, how to fill that gap.
Yes.
And you've done this in the past, and you may have it in your slides today, but there's been a reduction over time of what that's coming down from the state to the schools. The percentage of dollars that fund public education, what percentage the state's funding and what percentage the local schools are asked to put in?
Yes, yes. You're talking about the local 5 mil share, or the local 5 mil share?
Well, I'm talking about the ratio of how the picture has changed over time of the percentage of the total cost that the state sent down then and now, and how there's been more of a burden placed on the school systems to fill that gap as we've reduced the state funding.
Right.
You have that.
Yeah, I'd have to look back at that and figure exactly what you're talking about, but there has been an increase over time with the state funding as you've provided. We've got rid of austerity, which was a good thing there. We've looked at other funding and trying to get everything up to where it'll be a little bit easier for the school districts to operate. So little things like austerity being taken out, the raising of the bus funds that we actually had for amended, those things are actually helping.
That's different than what you said. I know at the higher ed, the percentage to the dollars have gone up, the percentage has gone down. K-12 has been following the same formula. So the percentage of dollars should not have changed. Unless I'm missing something there.
Can I try,
Please.
Mr. Chairman?
You keep
I
throwing it
think,
around.
Senator Orrick, what you're saying is, while the state funding may have remained equal, which is really the point of this study committee, the cost of education, running the bus, it's not 89 cents a gallon for diesel anymore. Those prices have increased, which I think may actually be the sole reason that for the study committee is those. The reason you may have seen a gap and the gap that's grown is because costs have increased while the formula has remained constant since President Reagan, I think, Senator Dugan originally kicked it off. So, I do point out, though, that am I summing up what, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but I hope I'm summing up what was being asked.
Yeah.
You're wanting to say something, say something.
And John, you're the
I'll hold
expert.
off. I'll hold off. Please, I'll get back to you on that.
Okay, because I got a couple of questions then. The bus survey for the school, you said 19 years and 34 years
Yeah,
old.
between 19 and 34.
What goes into the survey?
The number of buses, the pounds per bus. It's a calculation where we pull in data from the school systems, that we equate with the number of buses that they have. So we look at Appling County with 36, that's changed. So when it feeds into the dollar amount, it's not really up to date, and that's what we're looking at. Just this basic example right here. The
You
number
said
of buses
a
will
new survey
change.
is needed. Who orders the survey?
Well, to fund it at 100%, we would have to do another survey and find out the actual number of buses out there. And we get the number from the superintendent's report. We have a number from the superintendent's report. And the last time we looked at it was around 13,000 buses. But
Okay.
we actually fund the buses at about 8,500 right now. So it hasn't changed. So those are static every year when we're pushing the calculation in the data.
Okay. And this is probably more towards the superintendent back there than to you. If we had every bus that we needed across the state of Georgia, do we have enough bus drivers to drive them? Okay. How many systems in state contract their transportation?
I'm not aware of that right now.
Okay. I don't think it's many. I think it's like 2, but I don't know that for a fact. And just for my education on this, well, the whole thing is for my education. Does the mileage that is in this, does that include extracurricular?
Extracurricular outside of the regular school day?
Yeah, I mean, not transport to and from.
Oh, outside, yes, so that's the extended mileage there. That's when we place in funding for the extended mileage. That's like for, traveling football team
Okay.
and things like that.
See, I was thinking band, but it's football team too. Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions on the bus? It's a smaller bus. So no other questions on the bus. We're going to go to the local 5 mil share. Good? All right, John?
Thank you. It's on the struggle. Thank you. Okay.
He has to do the same thing for us.
So, Local 5 Mil Share is a state and local partnership that equates to 5 mills. It measures the system's ability to generate local revenues. We receive the data from this calculation from the Department of Audits and the Department of Revenue. In FY23's calculation, it was $2.3 billion. This is the district's portion of QBE funding. The QBE funding is around $12 billion, so they pay, districts are responsible for 2.3. Districts cannot use federal funds, state funds, or student tuition, or funds transferred from another local school district to apply to the local 5 mil share. We have seen consistent growth over the past couple of years as property values increase. When I first started calculating this in FY16, it was 1.6 billion, and now it's gone up to 2.3. That, in comparison to the student population for QBE, has been at 1.7 million for the past 7 years. So as the property values go up, we're still seeing a student count for QBE's earnings stay static. Back in FY21, I think, we actually had to lower the local 5 mil share because it was over 20%. And I'll get into that in a second. So, local 5 mil share is the amount that each local system shall be required to spend each fiscal year to participate in QBE. Individual school districts calculated local 5 mil shares may exceed 20%, but the restrictions on local 5 mil shares are that it's set statewide, no greater than 20% of the QBE earnings, and it varies by system. The greater the district's ability to raise revenues, the higher their local 5 mil share. State charter schools, on the other hand, are given a supplement grant to apply as their local 5 mil share. There are some issues that we may have to address in the future. I'm just going to bring this up. For example, Burke County's local 5 mil share for FY23 was 95% of their QBE funding. And that's because their revenue has gone up about $4 billion over the past 4 years. Local. Yeah.
Plant Vogel.
So, and they have students, about 3,900 students, but their student count has gone down too. So that's an issue that we'll have to look at, when we get the calculations of where Burke's local 5 mil share is in comparison to their QBE earnings. So the basic understanding of local 5 mil share is that take 40% of district's equalized adjusted property tax, minus the exemptions. Exemptions are the agricultural, homestead, and veterans and 65 plus age, times 5 mils. By law, only 40% of the value of the property is taxable. Each county is responsible for calculating the assessed value of each property. Unlike equalization, local 5 mil share only looks at the property tax as part of the revenue raising abilities. So here we have an example of Appleton County again. So their sales ratio tax was 100%, 2.9. And you deduct the timber, and then you get 40% of that, which is 1.1. And then we take out the exemptions. And that's why we get the local 5 mil share when you multiply it times the 0.005. So that is the basic understanding of local 5 mil share.
I think at the last meeting, Mr. Chairman, you asked a question about military exemptions or something, or maybe John made some comment about that, about one of those exemptions was a military exemption. Did we find out whether that was correct or not?
I know we talked about it,
Yeah.
but I didn't think we did any military exemptions.
Not on local 5 mil share. We have the veterans.
Yeah, I didn't think we did
Right.
either, but it came up.
Yeah, I know there was a proposal that came up, especially, would have been extremely limited. It would have been the active duty personnel with kids assigned to, let's take Hunter Army Airfield right down the road, for example. Their parents are assigned to Hunter for 2 years. The kids go into a school, so there would have been a credit for the school because the 99% of those parents either live on the installation or are renting, so they would not be property tax. It's convoluted. So, but that's not on here.
Yeah.
I think if you're 100% service disabled, your county property taxes are you have an exemption for your county property taxes. So I see what you're doing. You're backing out the timber, you back out agricultural exemptions, which are going to be substantial, and I guess now the timber will grow as we go through if it passes the next constitutional amendment. So let me make sure that I'm explaining or that I understand this correctly, John, on your current slide. So if Appling County were to receive, if the QBE earnings were to contribute or attribute rather to Appling County $20 million, you would then take that $20 million, you would reduce it by the local 5 mil share of $5,630,000. Let's round it off to $5 million so it's easy math.
Right.
And their QBE earnings from the state, the check that the system would receive from the state would be $15 million, correct?
You're
Okay.
correct.
Thank you.
And I understand that we were to talk about eSplots, but we will have that information for you another time.
picked up.
Oh, okay, sorry.
No, we're not asking any questions about local 5 mil share. We will ask you some more questions about, I'm confident, just to get a better, complete understanding. And Senator, you can probably explain it as well as anybody can. I mean, you deal with it probably as much as John does.
John's better than me.
All right. If there are no further questions, thank you. Appreciate your time here today.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask one more quick
Sure.
question? John, let me ask one, and I've been confused on this, and I've not just today, but before today. I know in our local paper, there's a certain amount of percentage, 14 mils or something like that, the maximum they can charge. And I've noticed in our local papers, in various counties, they when they talk about the budget for the year, they say in order to get the correct QBE funding, we had to spend X amount of more dollars more or something like that. And from my personal side, I get really hung up on just spending money to spend money. Explain that to how that works.
So I think there's a misunderstanding about, this is the equalization grant in mills. There's a misunderstanding about the mills set. So when we calculate equalization, we use the tax revenue that comes in, and we divide that into the 40%, and that gives us a mill rate. The only time we use the actual mills, it's called the effective mill that we use. The actual mill, the only time we use the actual mill is when there's a change that's greater than 0%, and then we apply that to the effective mill. So what we use for QBE funding, for equalization funding, is the effective mill. And the effective mill is basically taking the tax revenue of the district and dividing into the 40% sales rate, tax ratio. Is that?
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up on that then, John?
Sure.
So would it be, so basically, I think what Senator Hickman is seeing in his local papers potentially is that, or hearing reported, is that if his local school board doesn't set a millage rate at a certain amount, that they would lose equalization.
And they would not.
Okay.
But that's what it is.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
A question occurred to me, on the age of these school buses, is that strictly a local decision, and we at the state just ride with, when you need to replace school buses, is that all on the local, is that out of the local pocket? Because that's a big expenditure, is it not, to modernize your, I know we heard testimony of students riding in steaming hot South Georgia heat with no air conditioning in the buses. I don't even know if those buses are, I'm sure they're not up to date with the seat belts.
Right.
Just, they do not reflect the modern understanding of safety, safe transportation by any stretch of the imagination. So where does that decision rest? Do they tough it out and go with these old clunkers until they just fall in the ditch, go by the side of the road? But the state has nothing to say about that. We just keep motoring along with the formula.
So, yeah, the districts are struggling. Yeah, they're struggling with the buses. And I don't have the details on what's going on between that. This is more the facilities department, but we can get more answers for you in that area about how we're dealing or how districts are dealing with this.
Because if we're looking at transportation for our public school students, that's kind of a fundamental reality
Yes.
that we should, I think, educate ourselves about.
Yes.
To know the real picture that's facing local school boards and local taxpayers and the students that are being conveyed in those vehicles.
Yes.
For us to understand that age thing and that safety thing, and how we're gonna get our arms around that and move forward.
Yes, I agree.
Senator, didn't we put money in for buses?
Yeah, millions. I was actually trying to pull I was trying to pull the exact number. That's why I was sitting here. This isn't connecting well, but I was trying to pull it up on my phone. But yes, sir, we fund buses. And John, this may be outside of your realm of knowledge, but funding per bus tails off after a certain number of years, correct? Isn't there Do you know, can you speak to that? And if not, we can,
Well, I have to actually get into the
Okay.
details of that.
Jan, Nan, I'm sorry. Nan, one way to prevent kids from being so hot on the school buses is don't start school in July. Sorry. It was an easy shot. She put it right there on the tee for me.
Go after Labor Day, right, Mr. Chair?
Well, that was when you and I had to plow the fields in the morning and then walk to school. We didn't even get a bus.
Walk uphill both ways.
All right. Any real questions on the local 5 mil share? All right. Thank you. Appreciate your presentation.
Thank you, John.
Always informative. Next up, we have the Reason Foundation. I'm going to let y'all tell everybody who you are and what you do. Thank you.
I'm not with the Reason Foundation, nor do I play a Reason Foundation expert on TV, but my name is Kyle Wingfield with the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, and we partner with the Reason Foundation on a number of issues to bring their national expertise to Georgia and help inform our debate. And education funding is one of those. So I just wanted to say, before Christian gets started here, just that we are encouraged by this committee process. We're very supportive of the idea that QBE needs to be updated after all these years, and would love to help work with you on that. So to that end, I will turn it over to the actual Reason Foundation representative here, Christian Bernard. Thank you.
I'm just going to adjust this up. Thank you to the committee for having me. I am, so my name is Christian Bernard. I'm a senior education policy analyst with the Reason Foundation. We have a team at Reason Foundation that specializes in K through 12 school finance. So we're a 501c3 nonprofit think tank, and our team specializing in school finance, we basically provide research and pro bono technical support to any state legislatures that are trying to overhaul their school finance systems to make them more student-centered. So what I'm here to speak about today is just to talk about how Georgia does school finance in relation to other states. So I just told you that we are Reason Foundation. We're a 501c3. I'm a senior education policy analyst. I've been with Reason for 4 years. So I'll start off just quickly with why does school finance matter? I think when we talk about K through 12 education, often the conversation is about curriculum or pedagogy or what's going on in the classroom, which is very important. But ultimately, your playbook is your budget, right? Your budget is determining where everything is going, how resources are being used. And when we go to different states, what we often see are, this is just a couple examples of some of the components we'll see in outdated funding models. But we'll see funding based on programs and resources. So there's not a huge focus on equity. And do I just need to update the screen here? Okay, that's all. That's why I said no signal. Sorry, that was not part of my... Is there anything with the A? I'm just going to do my best not to touch it. Okay. We also see that funding will be very dependent on property, wealth, and zip code. So these are all components that we see in state finance systems that are, it's going to hamper your playbook. It's going to hamper your strategy and your ability to allocate dollars coherently. So our principles at Reason are, first, fairness. We believe dollars need to be allocated fairly to all students, and also additional funds need to be allocated to students with additional needs. Portability is a big one. If students are changing to a different public school or going across district boundaries, if dollars can't follow them, then they're going to have restricted options. Transparency, so we believe formulas need to be streamlined and easy to understand. So to any degree that a formula is opaque or difficult to understand, it's going to make it difficult for stakeholders to assess how that formula is doing. And then, jump forward, and then flexibility. So we believe that those closest to the children, the local leaders, are best situated to know how education dollars can be used, should be used to help students succeed. And the way to get there quickly, you want to streamline your funding streams. So if you have various ad hoc grants, then there's not going to be an overall coherent strategy to your funding formula. Equalize, make sure that dollars are not varying based too much on property wealth or zip code. empower, so give local leaders that flexibility, and then inform, shine a light on how dollars are being allocated and spent. Okay, so quickly, national context. So Georgia per student funding in 2020 was $13,605. And since we're talking about the local 5 mil today, I thought I'd add some information about Georgia's dependence on local revenue sources in case you had any questions about how that compares to other states. So Georgia is just above the national average in how dependent it is on local revenue sources. And as you can see there on this chart, it's almost an identical split between state and local sources, with the federal dollars playing a very small role. This is a summary of the funding models that states use. So in that left bucket there, you have student-based. So you have 30 states that more or less the foundational principle of their school funding system is they attach a base dollar amount to students, and then there are weights that are allocating primarily dollars to school districts. Now you see Georgia's highlighted in red there. They're in the hybrid bucket. This is from a resource EdBuild, which is a different think tank that evaluates and summarizes state finance systems. They put Georgia in a hybrid category because Georgia has some components of a student-based funding system, but then it also has what are called a resource-based component. So there's a big emphasis on staffing ratios in Georgia's funding system. So I'm just pointing out that there are a lot of states in the student-based bucket. They are not as prescriptive when it comes to staffing ratios. Also notice there that there are very politically diverse states in that student-based bucket. So I don't see it as a partisan issue. So just to get more concrete, to compare allocation practices. So states using student-centered funding formulas, the first thing I notice is the base amount is generally a pretty large share of the whole funding formula. It's going to depend on the state, but it's going to be between $4,000 and $8,000 per general education student. Of course, that, like I said, it varies based on state. Comparatively, Georgia's base amount is low. Now, that's not because necessarily Georgia is spending less. It just means it's putting less money in the base. A second thing that's pretty common with states using student-centered funding is that weights are often simple and funding is not expressed as full-time equivalent positions. Well, in Georgia, the allocations are pretty highly differentiated when you look at the QBE earnings sheet on students served in various programs, and they're expressed as staffing positions. And then finally, in states using student-centered funding, generally, formula dollars have minimal strings attached. Formula funds in Georgia have some stipulations for their use. This is just to kind of, again, make this point a little bit more concrete. This is a picture of a state aid calculation sheet in Oklahoma. Oklahoma does not have a perfect school finance system by any stretch of the imagination, but this is the summary of their earnings. They have a couple different formulas. They weight based on student individual needs. They have a local share component, much like Georgia. But what I want to draw your attention to here is just this right-hand column here. This is one school district in Oklahoma, and this is basically a summary of the state aid they're getting. It's just being expressed as dollars. Now I want to show you Georgia. This is the QBE earnings sheet. Now, this is the statewide allotment sheet, but I just want to show you that's how dollars are allocated in Georgia. So what you see first and foremost is that dollars are being allocated as full-time equivalent positions and highly differentiated funding streams. I'm not saying Oklahoma has a perfect funding system. I'm just saying there is a cultural difference between how these two states do school finance.
Can I bring your attention to that fourth line down there?
Yes.
Yeah, I have one. This is great. When we're done, I guess we'll have these up.
Yeah, you will, and we can circle back too. I'm happy to do that. Yeah.
You're giving us value right now.
No, I'm having trouble with it.
Yeah, it's too fast to digest it. Could you go back for a second to Oklahoma? Because I want to look at one.
Yeah, sure. I cannot teach you Oklahoma school finance system right now, but what I'm trying to draw your attention to is, okay, for example, the high year weighted average daily membership is on the top left. That's the student count. It's being multiplied by a foundation aid factor, that multiplier there, and then there is your number. That weighted ADM is a weighted student count. So the additional student needs are being factored in there. It's multiplied by a base amount. Now, Oklahoma, like I said, does not have a perfect funding system, because they also have a separate transportation system, funding formula, and they have a salary incentive aid formula, which is basically a duplicate formula. But the point still stands that they have an account, and then those chargeables right there, the 75% of the county 4 mil, those are, it's like the 5 mil, like the 5 mil in Georgia. Go ahead.
So, thank you. So if you pulled that ADM, you're saying that's where we break it out in like disability categories, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're breaking that out in the ADM.
Yeah, that's right.
If you
So-
pull that ADM, does that ADM look like our allotment sheet?
So the dollars, no. So the student counts, yes, they're going to be similar counts factored in, but they're not being counted based on the programs they're getting. So,
Okay, I guess I'd love to see how they get to the ADMs, because if that's how they're weighting it, and there's a different way to weight it, I think that'd be of interest.
yeah, and it definitely, if you broke that out, it would look complex, absolutely. But they're not getting allocated staffing positions either, right? They're getting allocated dollars. I guess that's kind of the main point I'm making.
So the salary aid incentive at the bottom then doesn't.
No, it's called salary incentive aid, but it's dollars in Oklahoma. Can I keep going?
I was just going to say, there's another whole piece to this, and
That is, what's the educational performance of Oklahoma students? What's going on there? You know, and how that compares or contrasts with what's going on in
Right.
Georgia. So that's a significant
Yeah.
factor to.
And I'll get into some case studies too. We can talk more about student performance. Okay, and the local 5 mil was already covered. I just pulled some data from your website just in preparation for the presentation. This information has already been provided. The 5 mil share in FY22 was almost 20% of QBE earnings. This is a less updated number than what you provided, sir. But what I want to point out is that school districts can and most do levy above the local 5 mil share. So when we're talking about the 5 mil share as the share of the QBE formula, I just want to keep in mind that almost no district levies just 5 mils for education. So this is the summary of Georgia school district millages up to 20 mils. So districts can levy up to 20 mils basically at their discretion. And you have, most districts in Georgia are actually between 10 and 20 mils for their education taxes. And this is really where any inequities in your funding system are coming in. It's because these districts are able to raise these funds based on their property wealth locally, and any inequities in your funding system, this is where it's coming from.
Can we go back to say, I thought we had said, maybe I just said it, that the maximum that could be levied was 14 mils.
20.
20 is the maximum? Okay.
Mr. Speaker, I think that the certain charters that were given to certain schools limit their ability to charge mills. So you may be dealing with a school system that has their charter itself caps their millage rate. It can cap lower than 20.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
And just to give you a sense for the funding patterns that are created by the QBE, but also the local millages here, this is just a chart of all the school districts in Georgia. The bubbles indicate size of the district. On the y-axis, you have state and local funding per student, and on the x-axis, you have assessed valuation per student. This is a trend we see in most states because they're able to raise more dollars locally. But when you talk about funding fairness, I think it's important to at least keep in mind that this is something that's happening. When you have districts that are based on property wealth are able to raise more funds locally and have more money for their schools. So now that we talked briefly about the QBE, and I made some points about the 5 mil, just because I knew that was a theme of the panel today. But I want to talk about states that have done school finance reform and have adopted more simple and streamlined school funding formulas. So California, back in 2013, adopted the local control funding formula. The prior formula they had was largely categorical grants for very specific purposes. The primary policy aims of this reform were to improve funding equity and to increase local flexibility over dollars. So this is a sampling of all the different programs that California collapsed into their formula. Now, the point I want to make is they didn't cut these programs. They didn't cut student councils. They didn't cut civic education. What they did was they took basically a stack of gift cards and they turned it into a check. And so then the dollars were streamlined and directed towards higher need students based on individual student needs, and the districts had more flexibility with how to use the funds. This is what the formula looked like when the local control funding formula was adopted. So you can see there's some differentiated per student weights based on grade level, and then there are, base amounts based on grade level, and then there are individual level weights for students with greater needs, as well as a weight for students in concentrations of poverty. And since this reform was done in 2013, there's a lot of research that's been done. I want to summarize it for you just quickly. Survey data showed that most state superintendents really liked the local control funding formula. It allowed them to better align their goals and strategies with resource decisions. There were cultural shifts within school districts. So school districts started customizing on the margins with their dollars. They weren't radically overhauling their budgeting schemes, but they were able to leverage dollars in strategic ways that they saw locally as needed. And then finally, there's a focus on fairness. So research by Education Trust West saw a substantial improvement in equity, meaning that greater dollars were making it to districts with higher need students. And this is just a summary of all the resources in case you want a deeper dive on California's 2013 funding reform. Tennessee also just did this past legislative session. And I want to just stress this because I don't think it's a red or a blue issue doing student-centered funding. So Tennessee did a similar reform. And actually, I would say Tennessee's formula prior to this reform was even more complex than Georgia's. So their policy structure was they implemented student-centered funding, and they replaced a very complex spending formula with a streamlined funding formula. This is what the basic education program in Tennessee looked like before the 2022 reform. It has some similarities to Georgia's. So these are just all the categories that there were allocations for. And these were based on primarily staffing ratios and students enrolled in all these different programs. What TISA, so what the name of the program is Tennessee Investment in Student Achievement, TISA, basically replaced that convoluted BEP formula with a pretty simple student-centered funding formula with a base amount, right, so a flat per pupil amount at the base of the pyramid, weights for higher need students, and then they also had some targeted funding for some of their strategic goals, such as third grade literacy and career readiness program. And they also had outcomes funding incentives. This is a summary of the formula. Now, importantly, TISA is not taking effect until next school year, and so that they have some panels that are going to decide actually some of the particulars of how the outcomes funding and the direct funding are going to work still. But this is a summary of the formula they just adopted. And finally, I just want to draw your attention to the political process. So Tennessee had probably much like Georgia, rounds of review committees and study committees for decades prior to this reform. But in October of 2021, the governor came out and said he was starting a 90-day review process, taking public comments. He had 18 subcommittees teed up. By February, he unveiled the TISA proposal. It moved pretty quickly through different committees. House and Senate passed it in late April. The governor signed it into law in May. It was pretty clear from the start that the governor had, and the education commissioner had a clear vision for what they wanted to do with this reform, and they went all in. They took thousands of public comments. They had 18 different subcommittees. They heard a lot of testimony, and ultimately, I think they weren't trying to just get bogged down in analysis. They wanted to take in public input, but they wanted to get this thing done. And it built on prior rounds of research. It wasn't like they didn't understand what the problems were in the funding system. I think a lot of states are like that. They do rounds of review committees and they understand the problems, but they have to take the next step if they want to change it. Time efficiency and robust public engagement, I think I already covered that. I like this point. The Education Commissioner kept saying that this is a funding plan and not a spending plan. So it's a plan for how they're going to fund school districts. It's not telling school districts how to spend the funds. And here's a quote from the Education Commissioner at the beginning of the process. I kind of just want to, I'll close right after this. States who have gotten something passed that is productive and actually closer to the idea of what they wanted to accomplish have taken 2 to 6 months. The longer you draw out the process, the more people get stuck in their ways and are not as flexible. People are not willing to compromise on topics, and we've seen states who just kick the can down the road year after year after year. Every state is like this. School finance reform happens every 30 years on average. So I'm not here to say there's something particularly horrible about Georgia. I'm just saying that it takes a lot of political effort, and it's not just about analysis, it's about taking the next step. This process that they went through was very time efficient, that's for sure. So I'll just close recommendations for Georgia, 3 quick points. Increase funding fairness, focus on equity, and consider all dollars in your funding system. So the QBE components are important. I know that there might be discussions about weights for students with additional needs, but also think about all the dollars in your system, including the dollars above that local 5 mil share. Improve formula transparency. Make sure the QBE or the formula that you might eventually adopt is something that can be understood by parents, teachers, as well as local school leaders. And then finally, expand flexibility, empower local leaders to customize budgets to fit their student needs. Great, and with that, I'm finished, and if you guys have any questions,
I'll ask you. Thank you for your presentation. I have 1 or 2 questions about your presentation, mostly tied to, well, we'll start with the first one. You said that Georgia has a lot of strings attached with their funding proposals or our funding formula. In other states that you said there were minimal strings attached, so does that mean that the dollars in, how do I say this? If you're receiving funds in one area, do you see where other states allow flexibility where they can cross over that line and be used in other areas?
Right, so
So you receive
the
it in-
difference is
yeah.
you don't see much crossover between, like, you're not seeing other states take, like, capital money and, like, I don't know, put it in administration. So I'm not talking about that kind of flexibility. I'm talking about when they receive dollars, they get to decide a little bit more about class sizes, the administrative structure they want, professional development, school counselors. There's all sorts of staffing decisions that districts are given a little bit more flexibility to make. And I'm not saying that Georgia's formulas, their hands are totally tied, but my understanding is that in statute, there are some, especially on the direct instructional piece, there's not a lot of wiggle room with how those dollars can be used.
And have you looked at the waivers and how they've been applied and if that reduces that, or have you seen?
Yeah, Georgia is interesting with the waiver process. It reminded me of, I did a study of Arkansas's funding system a couple of years ago, and their waiver system, I don't know what the magnitude of your waiver granting process.
Percentage, like, I think every school system in Georgia except one has a waiver now.
Yeah, Arkansas is similar. Yeah, and that actually to me suggests that, okay, well, you want to give the districts the flexibility, rather than making them ask for it, just give it to them. Give it to them to begin with. I mean, a lot of states do use student-centered funding, and I'm not saying they all have stellar academics. I'm just saying that the sky is not falling, right? And they don't have to go to get a waiver to how to use certain categorical grants or something like that.
And then my last question, Mr. Chair, is Tennessee. You showed that, and that's interesting. I think a lot of us are waiting to see how the implementation of Tennessee's program turns out. I didn't see it. If you showed, I missed it. Does it fund positions or does it fund students? And how would you categorize the TISA program?
TISA? Yeah, sorry, I kind of rushed through that. I'll go back. It's a per student base amount. It's a student-centered funding system. And so districts are receiving their amounts kind of like that allocation sheet I showed you for Oklahoma. And the weights there are going to be applied to higher need students.
Thank you for your presentation. You know, there's an underlying, hadn't been articulated particularly, but this student-based funding is another way of saying parents can take their kids and put them somewhere else and take the money out of the school system where their kid was and have it go with the student. Isn't that the bottom line here? And it's tied to vouchers and
No.
private schools being able to get public school dollars to educate kids?
No. So states that use student-centered funding, I actually drew up a couple examples of the states that have student-centered funding and don't have school choice. So California, Colorado, Maryland. So those are a couple examples of states. So they have student-centered funding. I mean, New York, I mean, there's 30 states in that bucket, and you can go through, they don't have school choice programs. And the other point on that is that vice versa is the case. So you have states that don't have student-centered funding, and they have vouchers. North Carolina, Virginia, Mississippi. So I see them as very separate issues. So student-centered funding is good policy. So in the portability point I was talking about, I'm talking about public schools. So,
Thank you.
yes, ma'am.
Thanks, Dan. I don't want to follow those people like California and New York. Sorry. That was, again, too easy. I was glad to hear that we're not particularly horrible here in Georgia. That was a nice lead-in. So on your hybrid model, one of the things that it just jumped out and I thought it was odd, you had 3 of the higher performing states in the nation and 3 of the lowest performing states in the nation.
Oh, sorry. Which slide were you looking?
Oh, man. 7.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Here.
What number slide is that?
I think you're right. 9.
So Louisiana, Mississippi,
Massachusetts is in the hybrid. I mean, they're a pretty high performing.
no, I was going,
Yeah.
Maine, Massachusetts, and Virginia are 3 of the higher performing states off the top of my head. I tried to pull it back up real quick. And then Louisiana, Mississippi, and I guess it was just those 2 were 2 of the lower performing states in the nation. I just thought it was odd that they were both ends of the spectrum on that
Yeah.
model. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. I'm definitely not making the claim that if you adopt a student-centered funding model, you're going to be like a top 10 performing state academically. I mean, there's a ton of other factors that matter with that. But if you structure these programs, I mean, there's a reason 30 states now do student-centered funding. It's not just because they're watching student achievement. It's something that I think it's easier to understand how dollars are being allocated, and it's also a lot easier to focus on equity. There's nothing wrong with inherently with allocating, say, I'm going to give you 1 general education teacher per 20 students. There's nothing wrong with that inherently.
Send schools money just to make an easy model if the outcome is not better, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I just point you to the research in California. So, and it's not, yeah, and I'm not saying just make it easy so everyone can understand it, but it is part of having accountability with how dollars are used. But if you I mean, I think the people at the districts are professionals and they do want to do what's best for their kids. They do have knowledge about what their individual students might need. In California, what they have is what are called these local control accountability plans. So there's actually almost like a community process for developing a budget with funds. So there is accountability. It's not like they're getting money. And like I said earlier about how they're using the funds, the evidence shows that they're not throwing out the allocation practices that were long in place. Does that answer your question? I'm sorry.
And it's unfair to you that I give you 30 minutes to tell me everything that you possibly know about education. So I anticipate there'll be follow-up with this.
Yeah.
There just a couple things that jumped out at me when I was looking at it.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Christian, you may have the information that we've talked about before, and that is looking at states that have a weighting, haven't taken into accountability poverty.
Yeah.
As being a category
Right.
of high need, maybe you could give us some comparisons
Yeah.
of those programs. Thank you.
Yeah, Georgia's absolutely one of the few states that does not have a weight for poverty. I think it's one of 6 or 5 now. Because Arizona just added one, was that counted? Okay. Yes, what's important we endorse allocating a weight to a higher need student. What I want to point out, though, is, again, all the dollars in your system matters. It's an interesting exercise to go to a state and look at the weight they might have for poverty and actually compare it to how dollars are making it to districts with higher need students. What's really interesting in Georgia is that when you look at the allocation patterns, I'm not saying there's not work to be done, Georgia actually fares pretty well in directing additional dollars to higher need students. That's not on purpose. That's because you have a lot of low-income students in high property wealth school districts. So I'm just saying you need to take into account not just the weight, but all the dollars in the system if you want to prioritize additional funds for higher need students. Like Maryland is an example. Maryland has a very generous poverty weight for their students, but they actually are less progressive funding system than Georgia.
These are these students in poverty?
Yes, yes.
What are you using, equalization? Is that kind of what throws Georgia's numbers higher, is our rolls on the dollars that roll in for equalization?
You mean for the lower than
Low wealth.
average?
Yeah. And then I guess we also
That's-
fund higher low
that's-
wealth that.
That's definitely part of it, but I think, we see this in a lot of states that actually your high need populations are concentrated in high property wealth districts. It's not always the case, but sometimes you look at a state and how progressive their funding system, and it genuinely looks like it's just a product of that. So, and you do want there to be a clear strategy to have, you don't want it to be an accident that you're directing more dollars to higher need students.
Yeah, one more question, Mr. Chair. You mentioned outcomes as something in the TISA program. TISA hasn't been implemented yet. Are there any states that have implemented outcome programs, and what do they look like?
Yeah, first of all, they haven't developed the framework for how they're going to do the outcomes funding. Frankly, we do not endorse outcomes funding, so I don't have a ton of familiarity with it. Arizona has a program like that. They split districts, and if they get to certain proficiency levels, they tack on kind of a small per pupil bonus, and they make sure to divide districts between higher and lower needs. So you're not just allocating more dollars to just the lowest need districts with an outcomes funding grant.
You've done a lot of work on this. You've done a lot of work on this, obviously, and understand this a lot. And if you were looking at us and say, these are the top 5 states that I would suggest that y'all look at and consider not modeling after. So what would those top 5 states be?
California would definitely be one. Actually, Indiana is another state with a good model. Indiana, interestingly, does not use local funds at all for their school finance formula. It's a purely state funding main formula. Texas, believe it or not, it's a complex system, but they actually have a very well equalized school finance system. Man, 2 others. I think Florida's is pretty good. I don't know. I don't know that I have many other states that I don't really make big differences past a couple of our kind of model states. Wisconsin's, never mind, sorry. Thinking of something else, Yes, sir. And we have these case studies more fleshed out, especially the California one. So I'm happy to share all of our resources with you guys.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. We will be in touch.
Thank you.
That's good.
I would just say you're impressive, young man.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Thank you all. Thank you for having me.
He's going to go tell his mom that Senator said.
Austin's extremely impressive.
You can write them, so. Okay, I've got 3 people signed up to speak. I've got Fred Jones,
It's true.
Denise Grabowski. Where's Denise? Okay. And Lisa Yount. Okay. Well, I knew there was a lot of people said they wanted to speak, and I was thinking, okay, I guess they're speaking for them. Okay, so I have 7 people. Okay, I'm going to go with Fred, Denise, and Lisa first, and then we'll start on the second sheet, okay? Fred, come on up.
Come on down.
Tell us your full name, well, not your full name, first, last name, and the organization you're with.
Fred Allen Jones, Jr. Yes, Mr. Chairman and members of the Education Funding Senate Study Committee, thank you for the opportunity to provide public comments related to the future of Georgia's school funding formula. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Fred Jones, and I'm the Senior Director of Public Policy and Advocacy at the Southern Education Foundation, which is based in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm here to voice my organization's support for the state to implement an opportunity weight, which is a mechanism to provide funding to schools based on the number of students living in poverty. It is no secret that money matters. In fact, increased financial investments matter most for students living in low-income families, who on average have access to fewer resources than their more affluent counterparts. Data also shows that sufficient per-pupil spending can increase graduation rates, adults' wages, as well as eliminate the education attainment gap between low-income students and students living in wealthier households. We also know that one of the State Department of Education's Vision's 2020 goals includes an objective to have every Georgia child on a pathway to proficiency in reading by the end of 3rd grade and in math by the end of 5th grade. It's 2022, and GOSA shows that less than 25% of elementary school students meet the department's goals. And according to Annie E. Casey's Foundation, Georgia's per pupil expenditure ranks 33rd in the country, between $12,000 and $13,000 per year. The Georgia Constitution reads, "The provision of an adequate public education for citizens shall be a primary obligation of the state of Georgia." I asked the committee, is there anything adequate about 75% of our young learners not meeting the academic goals set out by the state? Is there anything adequate about providing about half of the per pupil funding amount compared to the top funded states? There is a solution in my opinion. We encourage the study committee to recommend the implementation of an opportunity weight and have Georgia join the 44 other states already implementing this funding structure. If the opportunity weight is not adopted, there could continue to be negative impacts, including Georgia eventually losing its ability and ranking as a top state to do business in. We thank you for the opportunity to provide public comments, and just want to say thank you for investigating this issue, sincerely.
Introduce yourself. Could you, your organization, you just said the name, so if you could tell us what the organization does and what its history is.
Sure. The Southern Education Foundation is based in Atlanta, Georgia. We're a research, advocacy, and leadership development organization. We were founded in 1867, just after the Civil War, to help build an education system in the South. We're the longest standing education equity organization in the country. Again, we're based in Atlanta, but we have a 17-state footprint. We go as north as Delaware, as west as Oklahoma, and we focus on trying to build systems change. And I can follow up with you if you're interested in learning more, if that's helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Jones. Appreciate you coming down
All
here.
right, thank you.
Go ahead. Fred Allen Jones, Jr. Jr. Ms. Grabowski. first, last name, and organization.
Good afternoon. My name is Denise Grabowski. I'm a member of the Board of Education here in Savannah and Chatham County. Welcome to Savannah. I'm a native of Georgia and a product of our public schools. It's not hard to recognize the shortcomings of the antiquated QBE funding formula within the context of today's educational system, as you've already recognized. The formula needs major overhaul in subject and substance to meet our current educational needs. For example, in art, music, PE, and foreign language, the current QBE funding for grades 1 through 8 provides only one teacher for 345 students in one of these subject areas. So if you want to fund more than one, you have to find additional funds. In our rapidly changing world, the jobs of tomorrow will demand creativity and innovation, skills inherent in the arts. Physical fitness is essential for growth and development and also leads to higher test scores. In addition to the categories funded through QBE, it's also essential to reevaluate the funding allocated in the formula. For example, the $150 currently allocated to cover 8 days of sick leave for a teacher or the annual salary of less than $15,000 for a school secretary are hardly adequate in today's market. In technology, the only technology in the current formula provides for one technology specialist for every 1,100 students. The challenges faced by our low-wealth families, as we just heard, are very real, and schools are playing an increasingly larger role in addressing our students' needs. We must recognize the significant challenges districts face regarding students and families in poverty. High absenteeism, health disparities, and food insecurities play a tremendous role in learning and educational outcomes. An opportunity weight should be allocated so that the circumstances a child is born into will not dictate his or her educational success. Please keep public dollars public. When our schools reflect the true diversity of our communities, our students develop lifelong values of understanding and awareness. In a world where empathy and tolerance are quickly eroding, our schools should be the foundation that builds in our students an understanding and appreciation for community. Rather than siphoning off money for private school vouchers, we need to invest this money into our public schools so we can elevate the learning experience for all students. Not only do programs like the Qualified Education Expense Tax Credit funnel public funds to private schools, but these programs also lack transparency, accountability, and oversight, as documented by the Georgia Department of Audits and Accounts. Since 2008, these programs had diverted over $1.3 billion, with a B, from our public education system. Lastly, it is exciting to see the fiscal year 23 budget increase for Georgia pre-K program. Thank you. While this is certainly a step in the right direction, we need funding for pre-K at the same rate as kindergarten, which in FY23 would require another $141 million. We need to fully fund pre-K universally. This means realistic class sizes, adequate per pupil funding, and no caps on enrollment subject to appropriation. We absolutely know the importance of early childhood education on long-term academic and lifelong success. When we invest in our children, we invest in our future. What's good for our scholars and schools is good for our state. I know we've been here before with QBE. Let's hope we make it over the finish line. Thank you for this opportunity today, and my thanks to each of you for your commitment to education and your service to the state of Georgia. Thank you.
Question?
Can I ask a question?
Question?
Thank you for being here, ma'am, and I'm proud that you are willing to serve on the Board of Education.
Thank you.
Do you have an idea of what level the illiteracy rate is in Chatham County?
I have my associate superintendent here. I don't know if she has a literacy rate. No, sir, I
What
don't.
we're finding out, and the more we look at this, most of our counties, I'm sure it's across Georgia, particularly in our area, the illiteracy rate is more than 50%. So particularly when you look at kids in the 3rd, 5th, and 8th grade levels. And I think that what we got to do as educators and we as superintendents, y'all have got to make our communities more aware of how illiterate our children are. And we will never build a workforce, and we never build a strong system if our children can't read. And I think it's not y'all's responsibility, it's our responsibility as citizens and parents and community leaders to identify our communities as non-literate. And I think it goes back to us as people doing that and realizing that's a big part of growing our communities and growing our children is making them be literate. So and I noticed probably, I don't know the number here, I can look it up, you can go to the websites and find it, but I'm sure it's 50% probably around 50% of the kids in Chatham County at those grade levels cannot read it. About 50% of them cannot read at those grade levels.
I'm sorry. Can you come? No, I'm not cutting you off. I'm bringing you forward. It's because it's strained and they can't hear you.
Yeah. Hi. Good afternoon. I'm the Deputy Superintendent for Teaching and Learning for Savannah Chatham County Public Schools. And so in reference to your question, based on the most recent data, we have actually been working with our community and doing what we call working to get a collective understanding of, first of all, what those test scores actually mean and looking at growth. And we do have a literacy task force in relation to what you're saying. So we do recognize that we have work to do as it relates to Lexile, but we're also working with our community to understand that while our kids may struggle at third grade, we have to take into context that the most recent measurement, our kids had not been in school in any consistent manner 2 years prior to that. So.
In our Lexile, in evaluating the way in which we are looking at our test scores and translating that along with other metrics to Lexiles, we all actually find that the numbers that you see, the one-shot numbers, don't necessarily reflect what the children are actually performing at when they look at the Lexile level, which is the reading level. So we actually have a much higher performance at the third grade on the Lexile level than we might see in some of the standardized state testing, part of that due to the fact of the pandemic of the past 2 years. I would also add that my case for pre-K could not reflect more strongly what you just said, Senator, that we know the best way to have children reading on grade level at third grade, start them from the womb. Start them as early as we can, and that's why we absolutely have to have universal pre-K across the state that is part of school, that is not optional. I know y'all aren't over education as far as the pedagogy, but I would love for us to see pre-K mandatory. We don't need to wait until first grade to get our students into the schools. We need them in much earlier if we want to have the strongest education system we can have.
I think we
have
can.
the data to actually support that our students who have gone through our pre-K programs and our kindergarten programs do perform better.
I think we know this because we've heard it so many times that actually the prison system determines the number of future beds to be built based upon characteristics of kids at third grade level. And that's just a sad statistic. And to me, it goes back to our kids not being able to read. And so that's just a big passion of mine. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your remarks. The deputy might be needed up here when I pop my question. I don't know. Those were compelling examples that you gave demonstrating that QBE is kind of antiquated would be maybe too strong a word, but one technology teacher for 1,100 kids, I think you said.
A technology support personnel, so the person you call when your computer doesn't work.
Oh, yes. And Governor Miller was the first, made the first move to fund that technology person back in the 90s. But so that's a long time ago. And so those, one teacher for 345 children in the art and the P and so on.
Yes, ma'am.
So, and what about school counselors and school psychologists? Because this whole understanding of the connection between the emotional state of a child and the capacity to learn and make progress. We've got great and grand new data on that means that you can't deal with one without the other. What are those in those counseling positions? What's the ratio there?
Do you know?
So off the top of my head, I don't know exact numbers, but I do know that there are a few hundred students for every counselor. And so as a district, our board has been committed to, we just did an actual local programmatic improvement so that we could add counselors that we actually fund as a district because of how high that ratio is. So it depends on what your grade span is. It's a little bit different ratio in elementary than it is in middle grades, of course, than it is in high school.
And we've made the commitment here locally to have a school counselor, a school nurse, and a school resource officer in every school. And that's not funding we get from the state. That's a commitment we've made here locally because we know it's what our students need to be successful. And so having those considerations, and I think that's part of this evolution that we're seeing of the role that schools are playing in our communities, that we are having to fill more and more voids. We have over 20 schools with food pantries in order to make sure that our children are fed. So we are providing more and more services, and I think that's an important role for us to play as a community, but there are funding ramifications certainly for that.
Thank you. And that's, obviously, that's why we're looking at. How long have you been on the board?
I'm finishing up my second year.
Okay.
My
Then
mom
you
was a teacher and both of her parents were teachers, so education is very near and dear to me.
You wouldn't remember a gentleman named Otis Brock from down.
I worked very closely with Otis Brock, actually, in some of my advocacy work many years ago, and he was such a tremendous loss to this community.
Yeah.
He was an amazing,
Tragic.
amazing man. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Dear man.
Yes,
Dear man.
absolutely.
And last one, and the fate of the rest of the meeting. Do you know a John Grabowski?
You know, I get Grabowski questions. I get Grabowski questions so many times. I'm married into the family, and the only Grabowskis I know are the ones in the immediate family.
Okay. That's too bad, because he's a good guy.
I'll look him up.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate you coming here. Hey, just general. I don't envision a formula that we could create that will fully fund every need, every necessity of every school district across the state. The local school districts are going to be partners with the state going forward. We're going to try to modernize this as much as we possibly can to make sure that we're relieving as much pressure as possible to each of the school systems. But helping kids, we haven't heard it yet. I'm sure it's going to come up a little bit later. There's a program out of Boston that to help early childhood education and reading at the pre-K level, where they're actually not working with the kids, they're working with the kids' parents. And the kids' parents, to kind of break what they've been doing over a period of generations, the parents want to teach the kids. They have a desire to be involved in the child's growth and development. They don't know how to do it. So I think it's Boston Reads. Be worth looking up. Good program. With that being said, Harrison Tran? Harrison, tell us who you're with.
Hi, I'm here with Deep Center and the Georgia Youth Justice Coalition. Oh, repeat that?
What's your organization?
Oh, so the Georgia Youth Justice Coalition works with a bunch of students across the state of Georgia to address students' needs in terms of, QBE and, counselors in schools. And Deep Center is a local nonprofit that works with Chatham County students to empower them to make a just and equitable Savannah. I've been a student in the Savannah and Chatham County public school system all my life. Growing up, I was fortunate enough to attend a school in a relatively affluent area of Savannah with readily available staff that were there to assist students' needs. When I entered high school, however, I saw these stark differences between attending schools in different areas of the city. My freshman year, I attended a small school on the east side of Savannah known to be less wealthy than other schools around the city. Every day, students were either freezing or sweating in classrooms. The urinals in the boys' restroom had 0 dividers, giving no students the essential privacy to relieve themselves. In the lunchroom, there were leaks in the roof, causing water to drip onto the floor or into trash cans. The disparities between lower income and higher income schools were blatantly obvious. I've since transferred schools because I could no longer tolerate the conditions there. However, the students, my friends, who have no choice but to attend the school are still suffering. When our schools aren't being consistently funded, schools lose valuable resources that teachers would typically need, therefore losing them. When districts fail to retain these teachers, students suffer. At the schooling I attend, we have a consistent rise in student enrollment, but a decrease in the number of counselors in schools to accommodate them. The school the school currently has only 3 counselors serving all 1,000 students. Those counselors had to take on twice the workload after the recent departure of one. The policy of my school is no appointment, no counselor. It took me over 3 weeks to see a counselor about a simple schedule change. What if a student was having a mental health crisis and needed to be seen by a counselor? What if a student needed housing after losing their home? What if a student lived in an abusive household and had no one else to go to? If Georgia legislators care about the needs and well-being of students, they would fix the formula and fund our schools so that districts have enough money to maintain buildings and employ all the support staff necessary for all students to receive the same educational opportunities. Our children deserve better. Thank you.
I'm not 100% familiar with everything in Savannah. When I was coming in today, I passed Jenkins High School. Is that in one of the more wealthier parts of Savannah?
No.
No, that's a brand new school, that's just one school.
It's kind of my point, is we're trying to replace these things as we're going along, and I appreciate the school districts identifying, but it's not, I hear you, and I appreciate your passion. But we do care, which is why we're here right now. And we're looking for all kinds of options to improve the quality of education all across the state. So thank you for coming. Appreciate you giving us your time.
Thank you.
Valencia Quarterman.
Hello. It's Jaleesa Quarterman.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You're fine.
That's why we make you restate your name when we come up here.
Yes, thank you. So as I stated, my name is Jaleesa Quarterman, and I'm a volunteer with Deep Center's Youth Community Organizing Committee, and I was born and raised in Savannah as well. And I graduated from Georgia Southern University with a psychology degree, and I minored in childhood and family development. So growing up, I attended public school. Kind of like his experience, I attended Groves High School. Everyone in Savannah will know how that quality is. So my mom made the executive decision to switch me over to a private school during my 10th grade year. So that's where I finished out my learning experience, which was obviously a whole different culture. So unfortunately, as he stated, everyone does not have this privilege. So since many students do have less resources, I would personally like to see Georgia progress to a more holistic and realistic approach when it comes to supporting a conducive public school environment. To me, this ideally includes upgrades such as healthier food choices, free breakfast and lunch for all students, higher pay for teachers, higher funds to supplement school counselors, and student transportation, which has not increased within the past 20 years. And lastly, investing in curriculum that includes social emotional development. So in my experience working for City Year as a student success coach in Florida, I not only saw the benefits of a supportive school environment, but also an improvement in my students' attendance, behavior, and academics by providing individualized lesson plans and mentor lunches, which help foster their social emotional development. And just to add, a statistic from City Year states that when students are supported in their social emotional development, their grades and test scores increase by 11 points. In conclusion, funding should center student success overall. So thank you guys for your time. Thank you.
Antonio Cedillo.
How you doing? Good afternoon. Oh, mi nombre es Antonio Cedillo. Tengo una hija en STEM Academy Bartlett.
My name is Antonio Cedillo, and I have a child, a daughter. You have to speak in the microphone. And I have a child, a daughter, in the STEM Academy Bartlett.
Y en nombre de mi comunidad latina, pido se preste atención a los siguientes puntos que voy a expresar.
And in the name of our community, our Latino community, I would like for you to pay attention to the following items.
Ya que estos puntos están afectando de forma significativa tanto a los padres como a los alumnos.
Because these issues are affecting not only our children, but our families.
Mi primer punto es que en todas las escuelas haya más personal de traductores para los padres que no dominamos el idioma inglés en su totalidad.
My first point is that I wish that the schools have more staff interpreters that will help the parents that do not speak good English be able to communicate with the teachers, with the children teachers.
Mi segundo punto es que haya una mayor seguridad en las escuelas, tanto dentro como fuera de ellas.
My second point, it will be that we need better security or safetyness in our schools, not only inside the schools, but outside.
Ya que en los últimos años ha aumentado entre los estudiantes portar armas en las mochilas.
Because in the last years, we have seen some students carrying or having some arms in their book bag.
Y también fuera de la escuela debería haber más asistencia para la seguridad de los estudiantes.
And also outside in the school grounds, there will be, we should have more assistance, police assistance for safety.
Debido a que he sido testigo de muchos conductores que no respetan los señalamientos a la hora de la entrada y salida de los estudiantes.
Because there's a lot of drivers or that are not respecting all the signals, how to pick up the children, in which area of the entrance or exit of the children.
Y mi último punto, y más que un punto, es una exigencia hacia su persona, es que se contraten de forma inmediata más conductores para el transporte escolar, ya que no todos los padres cuentan con el tiempo o el vehículo para transportar a sus hijos a la escuela.
And my last point, and this is a point that is very important, and I would like you to pay attention, is to hire more drivers to transport for the buses to transport the kids to school, because there are many families that do not have their own transportation to bring the children to school.
Y el transporte escolar es vital para muchas de las familias latinas.
See, and the school buses are very key for many of our families.
De antemano, muchas gracias por su atención y espero se tomen las medidas necesarias para resolver estos problemas. Gracias y que tengan un muy buen día.
And thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you can find some solutions to these issues, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
I'm gonna mess this next one up. Lucina? Sorry.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Lucina Contreras Gabriel.
Hi, how are you? Good afternoon. My name is Lucina Contreras Gabriel.
Mi hija va en la escuela State Academy Bartlett. A nombre de mi comunidad latina y como madre pido a los señores senadores que por favor haya más traductores en las escuelas.
My daughter goes to the school, the STEM Academy Bartlett, and in the name of our community, the Latino community, and as a mother, I ask you, senators, to please assign more interpreters to our schools.
Mejores comidas saludables para nuestros niños, más fondos para transportes escolares,
better healthy choice of cafeteria choices for our children, more funds for our transport, bus transports,
más seguridad en las escuelas, tanto dentro como fuera de ellas, y como madre preocupada de mi comunidad latina, gracias por su atención, esperamos y confiamos ver pronto resultados.
and for more security in the schools, inside the schools and outside the school. As a mother of this community and my community, Latina community, I thank you very much for your attention, and we trust that we are going to see some results from you.
Thank you very much. Muchísimas gracias.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question? Ma'am, do both these, I would thank you so much for being here. Do these two individuals, do they speak English?
Little bit.
A little bit? Well, thank you for being here. And the next question, Senator Tillery, have y'all addressed this in Toombs County at all, the Spanish, lack of Spanish-speaking teachers and all?
The school system, yes, but not with, we don't have a line item on the budget. QBE doesn't recognize, there's not an enhancement if English is your second language.
Well,
Yes,
I think
that's
we
your
all
question.
see a need for that. Thank you.
Yeah, and absolutely, especially here, but when I get to Gwinnett, I'm going to have 42 different translators. We're- we got to figure it out. Figure it out.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank you.
you.
Have a good day.
I had a question for Senator Payne, because in Dalton, you have a tremendously high population. That's okay. I was just going to ask you to comment. You have a very high school population in Dalton that is Hispanic, Latino. And do you may not know, not putting you on the spot, is there what the translation situation is there? Because I know you have the college there that is designated by the federal government as a Hispanic serving college, Dalton State. So I was just wanted your reflection.
Yes, we do, but I think a lot of that has been handled. There's a lot of local emphasis on it. That's been a local addressed need that we've done at a local level. And having translation and also trying to assimilate, the cultures in Dalton. And I said Dalton is truly a melting pot because it's literally we all, kind of came and jumped in the pot together. So and to have that assimilation, it's really a lot of local efforts that's making a lot of that happen.
Yeah, I know it's a challenge. I mean, I can remember when the family lived in Italy, the first, you try really, really hard to learn the language, but it got to the point where I was putting my 3-year-old daughter out there, say, Megan, tell them this, and because she was fluent. All right, Liznetti? Is that right? Ms. Ortiz, you have great penmanship.
Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. Traía mi discurso escrito, pero decidí no hacerlo porque toda mi comunidad latina presenta los mismos problemas.
See, I had my speech all written down, but then as I heard the other, my friends and you, we present the same issues or problems.
Y ustedes ya han escuchado, necesitamos más intérpretes,
Sí.
more interpreters in the school. Nuestros hijos van a las escuelas sin ser entendidos y sin entender nada.
As you heard, we need more interpreters in the school. Our children, they go to school and sometimes they understand a little bit or nothing.
Hoy ustedes me están entendiendo porque a mi lado tengo un traductor.
And you are understanding me right now because I have an interpreter with me.
Imagínense un niño que pase por una situación en donde no puede ser entendido.
Can you imagine a little children, a little kid that is in a situation that he cannot be understood.
Entonces es difícil la transición de aprender para ellos un segundo idioma en estas condiciones y eso está pasando hoy día en Chatham.
So it's very difficult for them the transition and to learn another second language here in Chatham County.
Esa es la primera petición, es la más urgente que tiene mi comunidad. No es la única.
This is my first petition issue. It's the most urgently that my community has, but it's not the only one.
He escuchado con preocupación a niños latinos que indican comer comida chatarra todos los días en sus escuelas.
And I have heard from many children, our Latino children, that they are just don't like the food in schools, the junk food that schools offer.
Hamburguesas, macarrones, pizza no es un alimento óptimo para un niño.
See, as you heard, macaroni and pizza and burgers are not the ideal food for children.
Ellos están en pleno crecimiento, necesitan un nivel de alimentación más elevado y creo que Chatham se lo puede suministrar distribuyendo mejor los recursos económicos.
They are in a stage of their life that they are growing, and I think Chatham County can provide better choices for them to grow better.
Por último, en la mayoría de los Estados Unidos o en las noticias se escucha mucha violencia en las escuelas.
And as you know, you heard on the news, in the majority of the United States, there is a lot of safety and insecurity.
La violencia no es solo el bullying. Estamos hablando de armas de fuego, de armas blancas, cuchillos. Eso está ocurriendo en las escuelas de Georgia.
Violence is not only bullying, it's just arms and firearms and firearms.
Necesitamos más seguridad dentro y fuera de las escuelas, no solo porque hay niños, sino porque estamos en un país de libertades, o al menos los inmigrantes lo entendemos así. Por lo tanto, la libertad también se debe traducir en más seguridad para todos.
We need more security inside the schools and outside the schools. We are in a country that we appreciate the freedom, and we as immigrants, we would like that freedom to reflect those issues in the school.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Hildelisa Cruz. Tengo un hijo que cursa primer grado en la escuela primaria Windsor Forest.
Good afternoon, my name is Hildelisa Cruz, and I have a child, a boy that is in first grade in Windsor Forest, elementary school Windsor Forest.
Bueno, yo igual tengo mi discurso, pero los puntos son casi los mismos que han escuchado a mis demás compañeros de la comunidad latina.
I wrote my speech, but as I heard, the issues are the same that the previous speakers noted.
Y pues yo vengo igual a pedir, necesitamos más traductores en las escuelas.
But nevertheless, I would like you to hear it again. We need more interpreters in the schools.
Necesitamos más seguridad, más transporte público. Por mi parte, yo sé que no hay autobuses, entonces lo que yo hago es que dejo a mi hijo a la escuela y lo voy a traer. Pero a veces a algunos padres se les complica porque ellos trabajan.
We need more security and safety in our schools, but mainly bus transportation. In my case, I take my child to school and I go and pick it up, but I know many parents don't have that luxury.
Y también en las escuelas, hay unas escuelas que necesitan mantenimiento, en especial en la que va mi hijo en la Windsor Forest. Esa escuela se ve ya muy mal, yo creo que necesita mantenimiento.
And also the schools needs more structurally maintenance. The school that my child goes needs a lot of tender care.
Y bueno, creo que es todo y también menos bullying en la escuela y más seguridad. Creo que sería todo. Muchas
That is
gracias.
all, and also less bullying and more security in schools, and thank you very much.
If I remember right, Windsor Forest was built in the 50s. Well, I mean, not everything from that time period is obsolete, but Victor Garcia. Victor?
Hola, ¿qué tal? Mi nombre es Víctor García.
Hi, how are you? My name is Victor Garcia,
Tengo un hijo que estudia en la escuela GES, va en primer grado.
and my son goes to first grade in Hess School.
Tenía preparado un discurso, pero la verdad no soy muy bueno para hablar en público.
I had my speech written down, but I'm not very good at speaking in public.
Pero como han escuchado anteriormente, los problemas que tenemos en la comunidad hispana son muchos.
But as you just heard, the problems that we have in our community, in the Hispanic community, there are a lot of problems.
Por ejemplo, uno de ellos puede ser, como dijo la señora que acaba de pasar, la comida.
See, one of the things, like the lady just said, is the food and the choices.
Yo como padre de familia tengo la comunicación con mi hijo y siempre le pregunto qué es lo que come.
See, and as a father, I'm always talking to my child and says, what did you eat today?
¿Qué creen que es lo que me responde?
And what do you think he answers me? Nothing.
Come pizza todos los días.
Pizza every day.
¿Ustedes qué opinan? ¿Que eso es una buena comida para unos niños?
What do you think? Is that a good choice for our children?
Can I ask you a question to ask him? Are there other lines other than the fast food line within the school cafeteria?
En la cafetería, ¿tienen otras opciones o tienen líneas para irse a comer otras comidas o siempre eligen pizza?
Yo creo que él siempre elige pizza porque es lo más, yo creo que le gusta.
I think he choose pizza because it's what he likes.
That's what I was wondering about, because a lot of the schools I've been in, they have multiple lines, and some of them have much healthier choices. But at my age, I got the salad line and the pizza line. I'm going to the pizza line.
Sí, está bien. Al igual que el transporte, muchas veces me ha tocado esperar una hora a que llegue mi hijo.
See, and also with the transportation, sometimes I have to wait for an hour at the bus stop to receive my child from school.
Y uno como latino, uno tiene la necesidad de trabajar a veces hartas horas de la noche.
See, and us as Latinos, we need to work, and sometimes we work till the evening.
Y muchas veces tenemos que salir temprano para esperarlos y perder tiempo.
See, and so we go and wait, and we leave work to go and pick up the children. They're not ready, so we lose our time and work.
Y por último punto, sería mejor elementos como computadoras, tabletas, para que los niños puedan tener una mejor educación.
And my last point is if we can have more computers or tablets or notebooks for our children to use in school for better education.
Porque recuerden que ellos son el futuro del mañana.
Because they are the future of the tomorrow.
Gracias por su atención. Eso es todo.
For your attention.
Christina Magana? Magana, sorry.
What percentage in the schools are
In Toombs County, there's a high percentage.
Hello, how are you doing? Great, thank you. My name is Christina Magana, and I am a resident of Chatham County. I am also a representative of Migrant Equity Southeast, a local nonprofit that advocates for the immigrant community of South Georgia. I would like to thank the Senate Study Committee for their commitment to our children and their education. As I've heard Senator Dugan say before, Georgia is one of the top states for business, and our communities deserve to live in a state that is top in education as well. As you have already heard many times, Georgia is ranked 49th among all states for how low-income students score on state tests compared to their higher-income counterparts. Our children deserve better. They are the future of this country, and if we are already failing to give them the tools to succeed, our country's future is in big trouble. Georgia is one of only 6 states nationally that does not provide increased education funding for these schools. This needs to change immediately. I myself come from a family of low-income immigrants, and I recognize that when the education system fails to serve low-income students, that it exceedingly impacts children of immigrants, many of whom are also low income. One school in our district, Garden City Elementary, is close to 63% Latino identifying, yet they do not have enough ESL teachers to serve the large ESL student body. Parents of ESL students come to Migrant Equity Southeast for interpretation services to enroll their students and find transportation to school because this is not adequately provided by the district. Parents who do not speak English should be able to call the school and have dedicated bilingual staff available at all times to assist with their questions and concerns. They shouldn't have to wait a few hours for a phone service or a translator. All documents and communication should be easily available in other languages. I call on the Georgia Senate to provide additional education funding for schools serving children living in poverty so that our students can receive comprehensive English as a second language services. I also call on the Georgia Senate to increase funding allocations for culturally affirming curriculum, mental health services, advanced elective programs, high-quality nutrition, and school renovations. And finally, I ask that the Senate committee regularly prepare to have interpretation services available when having public meetings such as this. When I called in advance requesting translation services for today, I was told there would be none available, so we had to bring our own. You can look at the recent census and see that the immigrant community in the state of Georgia is rapidly growing. I know this is a new system to introduce, but I believe that we can do it. Thank you for your time and for giving me the opportunity to be heard.
Thank you. Any questions? And I appreciate you taking care of those in the community that needed the additional support. Thank you.
Thank you.
Daniela Rodriguez? Sorry.
Yeah, Daniela Rodriguez. Hi, everyone. My name is Daniela Rodriguez, and I am the Executive Director of Migrant Equity Southeast. Christina previously already said who we are. But I'm also a product of Glynn County Public Schools. I was considered a low-income student because I received free lunch or reduced lunch. But most importantly, I was an ESOL student, so English as a second language student. When I was in school, my best friend had to translate for me during class because there was no bilingual staff to help me. When my bilingual friend transferred to another school, I was terrified because I was on my own. I had no one to help me. I didn't speak English, and it was hard to be around my classmates. There are many things that I could talk about today, but today, I'm speaking in front of all of you, asking for language equity and accessibility. It is not okay for children who do not speak English to feel lost and scared in school. It is also not okay for mothers and fathers who do not speak English to don't know what is going on in the education of their children due to language barriers. Public schools in Georgia say that they believe in equity and on being inclusive of everyone. However, as my as my coworker previous mentioned, in Chatham County, for example, there is Garden City Elementary School that has more than 50% of the student population is Hispanic. However, many community members who have children who attend the schools have told me that there's no bilingual staff. And if there's bilingual staff, the bilingual staff is overworked. I believe that with more funding, no, I don't believe, I know that with more funding to hire and retain bilingual teachers, not only teachers, but also support staff, we can change. If we change that, this will directly impact the education of immigrant children and make a true difference in South Georgia. So I ask you all today to please look at the census, look at the numbers, see that we're growing, and properly allocate funding across Georgia, not just for the bigger cities, but all across Georgia, because there are immigrants everywhere. Thank you.
Alejandro Del
Good afternoon, senators. Nice to meet you. My name is Alejandro Del Razo. I have two daughters, and one is 11, the other one is 2. She's in the oldest one, she's in 6th grade. Anyways, as we hear, our community, Latino, is suffering. And for people who doesn't know, it is something that it needs to be addressed. 12% of the students of the Chatham County is Hispanic. So we need to do something, right? Because I see my community with broken dreams, you know, like because of the lack of translators, the lack of materials in the language that they understand. They're losing opportunities to be successful. And I see this, I see a lot of families just getting there, just never, they will never make it if we don't help them. Yeah, me, I'm married with an American woman, so my story is a little bit different. I understand the language, I can communicate it, but there is tons of people, those families of those, it's 4,500 students in the school system right now enrolled in in Chatham County. They're suffering because they don't understand what's going on. So we need to put this money towards ESOL programs that help this community. But most important, I think you guys, you have to make sure these funds are going to those needs, to the teachers, to the bus drivers. Because I mean, last year I was driving a bus, a school bus. You know, it's hard. The money that a bus driver is earning, it doesn't match the amount of responsibility that we are driving. You know, we are driving you beautiful babies. That it doesn't have a price. And honestly, I think if we offer, you guys or the school system offer more money to the school drivers, we're going to be able to keep them. We're going to be able to never have this problem again. Teachers, the same thing. They're taking care of our kids. They deserve more. That's why we're here today, just to be your eyes, right? Because you don't know what's going on here, but we do. We live with this every single day. So please let us be your eyes, so you guys can make better decisions where to put this money on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alejandro. John, real quick, I'm trying to remember, the 4 pots of money. You had special education, you had gifted, you had remedial, you had ESOL. What was the highest funded of those 4? Gifted? Higher than ESOL? Okay. That's why I asked you a question, because I know you got these things right off the top of your head. Candida Cano? Just, everybody's going to get the opportunity to speak. We are past time now, so if we're going to...
Buenas tardes a todos. Agradezco a Dios primeramente por la oportunidad que se nos da.
Sí, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you very much for this opportunity. I thank God for this opportunity.
Soy madre de familia de Ian Rosales. Asiste a la escuela elementary Garden City.
I'm the mother of Ian Gonzalez, and he goes to Garden City School, elementary school.
Está en primer grado. En nombre de la comunidad latina, pido se los preste atención a los siguientes puntos.
He goes to first grade, and in the name of our community, I would like to point out a few things.
Transporte,
Transport,
comunicación,
communication through
traductores,
an interpreter, and
material bilingüe,
and material or information in both languages,
salud alimenticia,
and healthy food choices,
física y mental.
And better choices to care for our physical and mind.
Seguridad.
And also security.
Educación, materiales, libros y profesores.
Better education with better books, and bilingual material and bilingual teachers.
Muchas gracias por darme la oportunidad.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Max Rosen. Kelly Pack, you're up next.
Hello, yes, good afternoon. My name is Max Rosen. I am here as a voter, and I am also with the Democratic Socialists of America. I am trying to help advocate for every student, and especially low-income students, to get everything that they deserve out of our education system. Georgia needs to ensure not just an education, but a quality and equitable education to every child. Law has already guaranteed it. Now is the time to act and to put the taxpayers' money where your mouth is at this point. Quality, equitable education is to make sure all children have access to a well-rounded education in a safe environment, not just children whose families can afford it. One school counselor who doubles as a para-teacher doing various jobs on the side, including testing and everything like that, for 400 children, which is it's not nearly enough for our school system. This is not a safe environment for the children if that's all they have to not only give them counsel on what they do for their future, but also counsel on their mental health. 1 in 5 children in Georgia suffers from some variety of mental illness that would benefit from treatment, and if you cannot catch it, you cannot treat it. And suicide is the second leading cause of death among our youth here in Georgia. And if we had teachers who were qualified to counsel, or more counselors per student, if we just had more counselors, more people to catch these things before they got to this point, we would not be in a crisis. But the teachers are already stretched too thin, the counselors that we are appointed are stretched too thin, and putting the funding toward the right places is what we need to be doing right now. And the right place is to make sure that these students have the proper resources for their mental health, as well as for their education. What this requires is money and power, and this funding bill and you, the senators, have the money and the power to get this done. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Kelly? Aaron Roma, you're on deck.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us this afternoon. It is very important. This is one of the biggest causes that I advocate for. My name is Kelly Pack. I am here with Voices for Schools, which is a local advocacy group that was started by parents just like myself that saw that we are seriously lacking in public education, not just in Savannah Chatham, but in the state as a whole, and we want to do everything that we can to make it a more equitable place for all of our students, regardless of what their needs are. I'm also the advocacy chair for the the Charles Ellis Montessori Academy, PTA here in Savannah. We are one of the only public Montessori programs in Georgia, which means we don't pay anything. It is a publicly funded school. The only thing that is different about that school is that it's a lottery that you have to enter. And I want to bring that up specifically because I want to talk about transportation, and I know a lot of people have, but one of the things that we are seriously lacking in Savannah Chatham is that the district decided to stop public transportation to what they call our specialty schools, and our Montessori school falls into that. So that means this is very unequitable for our students that are experiencing poverty and their families that are experiencing poverty, that they may not have the resources to be able to provide transportation to get their students to this school, robbing them of that opportunity to be able to have this experience at a Montessori facility or any of our other specialty schools. One of the things I'd also like to point out, having a semi-unique perspective on this, is I also work in logistics here in Savannah. Obviously, the Georgia Port is one of the huge employers in this area. I work for a freight forwarder, so I am very intimately aware of the issues that we have with the lack of drivers with CDLs, which is also what we're facing in our school system. And what you're facing as a state, as local school board, is you're not only having trouble retaining drivers, you're competing against a huge market of these drivers can go and work for trucking companies for far more money, far more flexibility. What is their incentive to work for the school district? And that is something that you really need to look at. And historically, bus drivers was an occupation that they could provide for their families. Now it's a part-time job. We need to set our money and our priorities where they need to be and say that our priority is that we are able to get our public school students to our public schools. So if we can't say this is a priority for us, we need, and for lack of a better term, we need to put our money where our mouth is and say this is a priority, we need to get our kids to schools, this is important, and make that a full-time job again. And I know it is only different parts during the day, but if you're going to retain talent and you're going to retain people that are going to keep our children safe and provide transportation to our schools, you need to show them we're going to make this a priority and we're going to make it a job that people want to have. They're willing to go out and get CDLs or provide training programs and support to get people their CDLs and say, okay, we provided you your CDL, you're now contracted to work with the school system for 3 to 4 years, and continue that program so that not only provides drivers for the school system, but then they can go on and provide more drivers, which are desperately needed also in import and export transportation. Very quickly, because I know we've got a lot that has been said, I also did want to talk very quickly about the free school lunch. Obviously, that was a program that was federally funded for the last couple of years that worked very well. Parents that maybe didn't want to fill out the free school voucher or free school lunch form, that were embarrassed or say that they're undocumented and they're worried about that status, are not going to fill that out, are now sending kids to school hungry. Kids can't learn when they're hungry. This, again, we need to set our priorities and say what's important to us. Getting kids fed shouldn't be a controversial issue. Get our kids fed, make that a priority. Last, along with everyone else that has said, we need to have that priority weight or poverty priority weight system. As you can see, I was very impressed with the one from Tennessee, that case study. And also just a note there, that bottom line, I don't know if you saw that from them, that their students that receive special education, the weight that was added to that was between 15% and 150%. That is a whole nother system that does not have near enough funding or near enough staff, is our special education funding. So please take that in consideration, and thank you for your time.
Erin Roma?
Yes. Good afternoon, or good evening, as we're approaching the evening. And to piggyback off of what Kelly said,
We're all going to be getting hungry soon, and we should think about that as we're talking about opportunity funding for students with poverty and a young child who is starving and trying to learn at the same time, as we all stop paying attention to each other speaking today. My name is Erin Roma. I have my master's in social work. I have lived in Georgia for 8 years. Prior to coming here, I worked as a school social worker in upstate New York. Fast forward many years, and I sat down to my child's first IEP meeting in Georgia and was very, very, very concerned about the differences between what I was used to and what I sat down to. Rising tides lift all boats, and when we are providing adequate funding for students with additional needs, it helps the whole. I have been advocating in special education down here since I've been here, since that first meeting, and it's taken 7 years, but my child is doing pretty well, but this isn't the case for all students. I have the history, the background, the privilege, the time, and the ability to attend to these matters, and that just is not the case for all parents. Students are not automatically brought the services they need. If their parent doesn't have the ability to find out what their rights are and then advocate for those rights, it is not happening. Teachers, counselors, social workers, related services therapists, paraprofessionals, building admin are stretched really, really thin. They're doing their job and many others, and they are exhausted. I spoke to 2 friends before coming here who are teachers, and one works with very young kids, one works with older high school students. The one with the very young children said that she suspects that about 20% of her class have additional needs that need to be looked at in terms of disability-related needs, but that it is like trying to get water from stone. And the high school teacher said that she is teaching a current English class with 38 students and 30 desks. These are just some tiny examples of friends of mine who are on the ground trying every day to do the best that they can for these students. And again, rising tide lifts all boats, and we pay for what we want. We pay for what we value. So looking at the equity of our funding system is very important, and I'm very glad you all are traveling around to hear from us. So thank you very much.
Just quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know the school that has, that she teaches in with 38 students and 30 desks?
I do, but I'm not going to say it right now. I'll tell you after.
Record so that it's all of Savannah.
Oh God, that's why you're the senator and I am just the mom standing in the mic. No, so both teachers actually said to me, please don't say my name, which is another meeting. So people know which schools don't have enough desks. The administration knows what schools don't have enough desks. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm not going to keep you long. I have a question before I start. Do you guys, is this about college funding as well? Okay. Okay, so.
So some of us are on higher ed.
Okay. Okay, yeah. I won't do that here. Okay, so I know that you know this, but I want to say it out loud. Like, you can make decisions that will encourage districts to spend money in ways that are better for our students, right? That encourage research-based policies that will help our student body. For example, excessive testing mandates from the state and federal government have forced local districts to narrow the curriculum in ways that harms our students. They push curriculums down to younger and younger grades, putting pressure on kids whose ability to learn the concepts that they're being forced to learn doesn't exist because their brain development isn't there yet. On the other hand, we could prioritize things through policy like funding to teach kids about executive function, which will help them in their careers, which will help them in college. We can fund things like conflict resolution, and we can incentivize it through CCRPI the way you incentivize other things that actually, unintended consequences maybe hurt our schools. So, to piggyback on that, the cost of college also forces schools to add more AP classes and more dual enrollment, and while that is wonderful, it's also extremely stressful I have a senior in high school, it's a very stressful environment for those kids. Let kids be kids is my motto. I wanted to say a couple other things. 1 in 5 individuals has a reading-related disability. Our colleges do not teach teachers how to identify or how to serve those kids. We're not identifying them in the schools either, in the K-12 schools. And this kid that was talking about his school, that we kind of dismissed him, it is my understanding that the funding formula pays for new buildings at a higher rate than it pays for remodeling or repairing schools that are already standing. So to say we're fixing that is really not the case, because we couldn't take his school and repair what's going on there with the same amount of money that we would get for tearing it down and putting up a whole new school. And that's what I've got.
Thank you. Actually, it doesn't cost as much to renovate as it does to rebuild. So, I'm sorry,
say that one more time.
It doesn't cost as much to renovate as it does to rebuild. That's what I do in my day job.
I understand, but they get a higher rate of funding from the state to build a new school.
Because it doesn't cost as much.
Well, is that accurate? I mean, the funding thing, I was going to,
Yeah.
that's what I'm trying to.
Okay. I didn't say my name is Jenny McCord.
Jenny, we had you on the list, but I appreciate you. All right. Thank y'all for coming. We've gone a little longer than we said we would, but it's important that we do. Savannah State, you still here? Stand up. Thank them for, they are so critical to us. If you need anything from them, it won't go that far. They got this, here you go. Let me use your back. It's just like Batman. It's like, need anything, you need anything from Savannah State, you just get this pen, flash the light, and they'll come rescue you.
Thank you all, and thank you all for being here to express our community's concerns to the senators. Senator Dugan, thank you for bringing the committee here to Savannah, and specifically to Savannah State University, to give us and our community an opportunity to share what's going on in our area. We appreciate you for working on behalf of all of Georgia, including us down here in the Coastal Empire.
Thank you so much.
Is everybody going back to Ireland?
That concludes our meeting. Thank y'all all for being here.
Are you driving back? Austin is our